Hello and welcome. In this video, I'll be demonstrating the value of NetSuite's WIP and Routings module for companies that assemble or manufacture products in-house. We first need to set up a BOM and assembly item in NetSuite, and to do this, you'll need to have purchased and enabled the Work Orders and Assemblies module, since this is a prerequisite for using the WIP and Routings module. There is a recorded demo of the Work Orders and Assemblies module if you'd like to watch that prior to this video. For this demo, I'll be using a baseball bat as my assembly item, since the production uses some raw material components, but it's also very labor and machine intensive to complete the finished product. So let's take a look at the assembly item for the bat. As you see here, the bat has been created as assembly bill of material item. So if we go down and take a look at the components, again, there's only a couple of components that are required here, which are going to be a raw solid ash tube, and then optionally black paint. And we see we just need one of those ash tubes and a half an ounce of black paint to finish the process from a material standpoint. At a very high level, this item also has a manufacturing routing associated to it. And we're going to discuss this in more detail shortly. But just note that we do have a default routing assigned to this manufactured item, and this is unique to the WIP and Routings module. Before we dig deeper into more of the WIP and Routings functionality, let's take a look first and see what we have in stock for this particular bat item. So right now in our locations, in our primary stock location, we have 71. Note that the average cost is $14.55. That'll come in play later. And in the production location, we do have 0 finished goods located in production. Creating this manufactured item is the first step in the process of setting up the tools needed to be able to run this item through a WIP and Routings process. The second is to define work centers. So as you see here, we have a list of work centers that have been defined. As we scroll down, we'll see that there's a number of work centers that are involved in manufacturing the bat. There's going to be lathe, laser etching, finishing, sanding. So these are not in order of the actual routing, but just the names of the work centers that will be needed and that will be going through to take the raw material and move it through the whole manufacturing process to create a finished item. If we take a look at one of these in particular, we'll look at the branding work center. We know that this is a manufacturing work center. And the key elements here around the manufacturing work center settings is the subsidiary it's located in, and also the default definition of machine resources that are used at this work center and labor resources that are used. So we can configure this to have any number of resource quantities and labor for labor and machine. It also is tied to a work calendar. In this case, we're tied to a default work calendar. You could have many different work calendars. This work calendar is defining that my work start day is at 9 a.m. It goes for 8 hours a day, and I'm doing a Monday through Friday operation. So we can obviously have full 7-day operations, 24-hour operations, and you can just define which work center, which work calendar you want to tie to that work center. The next configuration we need to complete in order to run this item through the WIP and Routings process is defining an actual manufacturing routing. So here we have a routing that we just called baseball bat manufacturer routing. And we see here that it also is tied from a location basis. So we can have multiple different routings for the same finished item depending on what location we're manufacturing that item in. Let's go ahead and edit the manufacturing routing. So now on the manufacturing routing, we can see that first of all, this is the default routing. And all the routing steps that are needed to run this bat through the manufacturing process are defined here. So we're going to go through a lathing process. It's going to be sanded, branded, laser engraved. We're going to do some finishing, which could be involving the black paint. And we're going to put a sticker on it and put it into a box. So that's all the definition there. Next, you'll notice that you've got the ability to define the number at a routing level, the number of machine resources and labor resources that are required for each routing step. So as we see here, we are going to need both machine and labor for the first 4 steps, then the following two will only be a labor-based routing steps. We're going to define any default setup time. So if there's a machine setup that needs to be defined for each of these work centers, or each of these routing steps, and we could define that here in terms of minutes. And also define the average time it takes one unit to run through this operation. So for the lathing, we're estimating it's going to take 1 minute for a bat to get laid, and then 2 minutes for the sanding process, and so on. Note too that if there's a lag period that needs to be defined, you can define that as well. So as you can imagine, if we go through a painting process of the bat, we can't take that freshly painted bat and put it right into a box and put a sticker on it. So we can put a lag time of, in this case, 1,440 minutes, which equates to 24 hours or 1 day. Lastly, but very importantly, on the routing steps page or tab, we'll see that we've defined our manufacturing work center, and we've also can define our manufacturing cost template per work center per operation. So if I drill into the lathe manufacturing cost template, we can see that as we run through this work center and this operation, we can define what actual accounts are hit as far as direct labor, machine time, machine burden. There's many other options that can be utilized within here, and this allows us to really gauge and narrow down our cost accounting and see where are our costs being incurred during the entire manufacturing process. Are we incurring more machine time, more labor time? If you couple this with the use of standard costing, then you can easily see different variances from standard cost across all different cost categories. So going back to the manufacturing routing, there's also the ability to define which components of the bill of material within this item, with the manufactured item, gets both issued and consumed at which part of the manufacturing process. So as I take the raw solid ash tube, we're going to say that we're going to actually inject that into the manufacturing process at the very first operation because it's going to be used on the lathe. Meanwhile, if we want to issue paint at a later time, then we're not going to need that until we hit the finishing operation. So we can set that up to only issue at that point. Now in this case, we're looking at probably a very low cost type of component being paint, but if you have very high cost, high value items, you wouldn't want to issue them all at the very beginning of maybe a long manufacturing process. So you can see that for a more complex manufactured item, the ability to dictate when different components are issued to the work order can be very valuable from a work in process standpoint. So at this point, we've defined our manufactured item. We've got work centers defined. We've defined our manufacturing routing. We've also defined a number of different manufacturing cost templates and assigned those to our routing operations. The next step, we can go ahead and I'm going to change roles. Right now, I'm in an engineering role. I'm going to change roles over to a manufacturing role. And from here, we're going to go ahead and create a work order. Let's just go ahead and generate a work order. And I've got set up my subsidiary that I'm going to be manufacturing this in, and my assembled item is going to be the bat. And I'm going to choose that production location. Note that when I created the combination of my assembly item, my location, it went out and said that we do have a default routing for that combination, and it also set the WIP designation to true. So this is telling NetSuite to allow this work order to go through multiple routing operations as opposed to just building the finished good in one step, as you would if you were using the more simplified work orders and assemblies module. So that's a major difference between that module and this module. It also indicates that we can account for WIP inventory by issuing inventory to the work order, which we relieve it from inventory asset account and add it to an inventory WIP GL account. And lastly, on the header area here, the scheduling method can come into play. So right now I'm defaulting this to be forward scheduled item, meaning that I might know the production start date, and as I save this, I'm going to make a quantity of 100 of these bats, as I save this, it can generate the production end date going through the routing and looking at the amount of time it takes for 100 bats to go through the process, and it'll pre-configure that. Or if I know that I actually want to achieve 100 finished bats on a particular date, like let's say 1/10/2017, then I can go ahead and save this, and it's going to go ahead and calculate what the production start date should be, again, based on the routing structure. So to make 100, and based on the time it takes for each of these to go through the manufacturing process, it's really saying that we just need to start the day before, so on the 9th of January. Now, if we were to edit this and say, you know, we have to make a much bigger number. We need to make 1,000 of these. Note how, it's going to let me know that I don't have enough raw material at this point to actually build 1,000 finished goods. So that's one alert that I can be utilizing to go ahead and purchase more raw material. Secondly, as I save this, it's going to then readjust that production start date to be much more in the past. So now I'd have to start this on 12/20 of the prior year in order to finish by 1/10 in 2017, based on the quantity and the time it takes to run all of these through that manufacturing routing process. This is great automation for being able for scheduling. We'll show in another video in more depth the ability to have more of a graphical production task scheduling tool, where as work orders are generated that might overlap each other in the same work center, it can alert me that I might be overextending that work center based on its work center calendar, and I can readjust the different production work orders to either different dates or going through different work centers potentially. But for this demo, let's go ahead and edit this back. We're going to switch this back to 100. And we'll then set up our production start again to be to 9th of January. So now I've got this work order generated and it's tied to a work order routing. I have the ability to print a work order traveler document that can be handed over to production to communicate the production plan, routing steps, and schedule. And here we see an example of what that routing traveler could look like, manufacturing traveler. So we've got all of our operations in sequential order: lathe, sanding, branding. We have the work center it's going through. We have the input quantity of each of these. We have the projected start and end date. So if this is a larger order, we could see what date this should be starting on. Our setup time, our run time. And this can be used to communicate back how much time each operation took and the amounts of raw material actually consumed compared to what was anticipated. Now at this time, I can now issue components to the work order on a per routing operation basis, or just record completions and backflush the correct raw material components based on the routing operation defaults and BOM component quantity defaults, as we saw earlier on the item record. So let's go ahead and we're going to go ahead and issue components on this work order. If you call in the manufacturing routing steps, we said that when we go through operation 10, we can issue the raw components for the bat, the raw ash tubing. In this case, we're going to say that we are going to end at operation 40 on this. So we're going to issue components to those operation steps. And here we see, here's the quantity that we can now actually issue. Note that we're not allowed to issue any of the paint because we haven't extended it into the routing 50 step, which is the area that we said, the finishing step that we said that we would issue the paint to. So that's all we have to do. We have our start in operation, ending operation, and now we're just going to issue those components. So once I've generated this work order issue transaction, I can go ahead and take a look at the GL impact of this, general ledger impact. And now we can see how we've issued $500 worth of raw material out of our inventory assets and into our inventory WIP account. So that again is a key element of the WIP and Routings module, the ability to manage that in-process WIP inventory. So let's go back to our work order. And now we're going to enter completion. So in this case, we're going to complete operation 10. We're going to just assume that we've completed operation 10 through operation 40, and we've completed 100. Now, if we look down, now we have access to the 4 operations that we're saying we're marking for completion, and it defaults in what the defaults were from the routings and the work center definition as far as machine resources and labor resources that were required. So we can modify these if we needed more or less resources within this particular manufacturing process, or we can keep it as the defaults. Same thing with the machine setup time, labor setup time. If things differed from the defaults, then we can definitely say that that was the case. In this case, what we're going to assume is that we've got maybe in the sanding process here, maybe it took more labor run time. So instead of 200 minutes, let's say it took another hour, so 260 minutes total to do that process. So it's going to be more than what the actual routing anticipated. So let's go ahead and save that. And as we did with the other transaction, we can take a look at how this affects our accounting in the background. Here now we're able to then move actual indirect cost from expense over into our WIP accounts, which will eventually get cleared out. But see, now we've got active WIP inventory values that are based on, and these accounts here are based on the manufacturing cost templates that we set up. And the values are based on the quantities that we ran through, the amount of time we said it takes, and on the cost template we defined the actual rate to use per hour on these. So now we're getting very accurate, very detailed cost accounting during the manufacturing process. So let's go back to our work order again. And now we have to do some completion of the remaining 2 operations and issue the paint to the process. So rather than doing just an issue, a separate issue and a separate completion, we also have the ability to do a completion and a backflush at the same time. So let's go ahead and use that option for this one. And we're going to say that our operations are for operation 50 and 60. We're going to complete 100. Now, because these are the final 2 operations, I also have the ability to put in a scrap quantity, if that's applicable. So here I can enter in a quantity, and this would apply the appropriate inventory and indirect costs to their appropriate scrap accounts in our system, and also decrease the quantity of finished goods that are generated. But in this example, we're going to assume that there's no scrap, and we're going to go ahead now below we see that we're automatically going to issue the 50 units of the paint. Save that work order completion. And look at the GL impact on this. What we see is we've got, not only have we then issued our material cost for the paint to WIP, as well as the indirect costs from those last 2 operations to WIP, but we've also cleared out that whole WIP total throughout the whole process and added the accurately costed amount of finished goods to our inventory asset. So what this is saying is that we created 100 bats. So this is saying that our average cost of each bat for this batch that we created is about $14.80. So we'll keep that in mind shortly as we look. And let's now take a look at this. We've generated the finished goods. The manufacturing process has been completed. If we review the bat item again, and we take a look at our locations, we see now that we've got 100 that have been produced in our production location at a value of $14.80, which is higher than what the average cost has been of prior manufacturing processes for this item, for the 71 that have been generated and eventually moved into the primary stock location. So if you recall, we needed a little more sanding time within this process to make this 100. So this is going to increase my average cost overall once I move these over into my primary stock. So as I sell them, it'll be sold at a higher per unit cost of goods sold. So that's a high-level overview of the value of the WIP and Routings module within NetSuite. And just to summarize the benefits, unlike the work orders and assemblies module, it allows for the inclusion of indirect costs in the calculation of overall cost of finished goods that are produced. It also allows for accurate period-end reporting of all WIP inventory. It provides a valuable production traveler to help streamline the production flow. And it provides the ability to assemble items to be manufactured in different ways across different work centers and routing steps on a per location basis, which will give your organization the flexibility to manage different processes across different areas of the world. This concludes the high-level demonstration of the NetSuite WIP and Routings module. Thank you very much.